We just got our first taste of subqueries. Now, I gotta be honest with you, very much like joins, remember we spoke about joins a good bit so far in this course, subqueries are known in the world of SQL as being a little bit challenging to understand. In my opinion, the reason for that is that we can use subqueries in many different locations in another query. Let me show you a very extreme example. So I'm going to show you a query that has several different subqueries inside of it. Just so you know, this query doesn't really do anything. It's pretty much pointless. It's just to show you how many subqueries in so many different locations you can embed. So take a look at this. There are 4 separate subqueries inside of here. There's one in our select statement. There's one inside the from, one inside the join, and one inside the where as well. So one of the reasons that understanding subqueries is challenging is that we can use them in many different locations. That's something that you and I are going to focus on in the coming videos. We're going to focus on how we can use subqueries in different locations and, of course, why we would in the first place. Before we get too far into that, however, I want to really understand what's going on here and why having a subquery in different locations is challenging at all. The reason that making use of a subquery in different locations is challenging to understand is that whenever we write out these subqueries in different spots, we have to change the type or the shape of data that is being returned from the inner query. So here's our first taste of this. And don't worry, I'm going to give you a lot more on this topic. So if this first discussion is confusing, don't sweat it. In this really large, kind of pointless query right here, we have 4 separate subqueries. Each of them, except for the inner 2, are being used to produce a different shape of data. The very first one, inside the select statement, is producing a single value. The 2 inside the from and join statements are producing a source of rows. And then finally, the last one down here inside the where clause is producing a single column. Understanding where to put these different types of subqueries, so one that produces a value, one that produces a set of rows, and one that produces a single column, is the real trick to understanding this subquery stuff. So with that in mind, we're going to take a little detour here, and we're going to focus a little bit on understanding the shape of data that comes back from any kind of arbitrary query. So these are going to be, again, just our first taste of this, and we're going to take a look at some other examples very shortly. I want to imagine each of these 3 queries right here, and I want to think about the shape or the structure of data that comes back when we execute this query. So for example, if we wrote out something like select star from orders, given the current structure of our orders table, where it has several different columns and definitely many different rows inside of it, if we ran this query, I would expect to get back a result that has many different rows and many different columns inside of it. Likewise, if we did something like select ID from orders, I would expect to get back many different rows, but one single column. And then finally, if we did something like select count star from orders, I would expect to get back one single row and one column, so essentially a single value. Whenever we get back a single value, or essentially one row and one column from a query, we refer to that as a scalar query. Just a little piece of terminology that you might see floating around here and there. So to really cement this idea very quickly, let's go back over and run these 3 different queries. And we're going to see the structure of data that we get back from each one. Okay, so back over here, I'm going to first do a select star from orders. I'm then going to run that. And sure enough, pretty much no surprise here, we get back many different rows, 4 in total, and many different columns and many different rows. If we then update that to be just select ID from orders and run that, we get one column and many different rows. And then finally, if we do a select count star from orders, that's going to tell us the number of rows inside the orders table. And if we run that, we get one single row and one single column. All right, so again, just our first taste of this. We're going to take a look at a couple more queries like this and just start to think a lot about the shape of data that is coming back to us. And then once we feel really comfortable with that, we're going to take this idea back over to the world of subqueries, and you're going to see that integrating subqueries into any other query is going to be rather easy and straightforward. So quick pause and continue in just a moment.